Pack your bags, old man. We're millionaires now and we don't need dead weight like you dragging us down. My son Garrett waved the winning lottery ticket in my face, his wife Savannah laughing as they celebrated their $50 million jackpot. I just smiled quietly and asked, son, are you absolutely sure you checked whose name is printed on that ticket? The laughter died instantly. When they looked closer at what they were holding, Savannah started screaming and Garrett's face went white as a sheet. You see, they had no idea what I'd been planning all along. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Let me back up a bit and tell you how we got to this moment, because the story of how my own flesh and blood tried to throw me away like yesterday's garbage is one that needs telling from the beginning. It was a cold Tuesday evening in November when everything came to a head. I was sitting in my worn leather recliner, the same chair I'd bought 20 years ago, when my back was still strong enough for construction work, watching the Mega Millions drawing on the living room television. The house felt smaller than usual, cramped with the tension that had been building for months between me and the two people I'd foolishly thought I could trust with my golden years. Garrett sat on the edge of the couch, clutching that lottery ticket like it was made of pure gold, while Savannah paced back and forth across the hardwood floors I'd installed myself back when I still believed this was my home too. The numbers were being called one by one, and with each match, their excitement grew more manic, more intoxicating. 7, the announcer's voice filled the room. Garrett checked the ticket. We got 7. 23 came the next number. Holy crap, we got that too, Savannah shrieked, her designer heels clicking frantically on the floor. 31, 42, 58. Each number was a match, and each match brought them closer to a hysteria I'd never seen before. They were jumping up and down like children on Christmas morning, hugging each other and screaming about all the things they were going to buy with their newfound fortune. And the Megaball number island, 12. The silence that followed was deafening. Garrett stared at the ticket in his hands, his mouth hanging open. Savannah had stopped pacing and was looking at her husband with an expression of pure disbelief. 12, Garrett whispered, his voice barely audible. The Megaball is 12. We won. We actually won $50 million. That's when the celebration really began. They danced around the coffee table like they'd lost their minds, talking over each other about boats and houses and trips to Europe. They were planning their entire future in those first few minutes, a future that apparently had no room for the man who'd raised one of them and welcomed the other into his home. This changes everything, Savannah said, her eyes bright with greed. We can finally live the life we deserve. No more worrying about money. No more compromising. No more. She looked directly at me when she said that last part, and I knew exactly what she meant. That's when Garrett turned to me with that cruel smile I'd been seeing more and more often lately. You hear that, Dad? We're rich now. $50 million rich. Which means we don't need your measly $800 a month anymore. We don't need you taking up space, eating our food, using our electricity. Garrett, I said quietly, this is still my house, too. Your house, Savannah laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the room like broken glass. Your house. We've been carrying you for 3 years old, man. 3 years of extra expenses because you couldn't take care of yourself after your little accident. Little accident. That's what she called 35 years of honest construction work, ending with a crushed vertebra and permanent disability. A little accident. Pack your bags, Garrett repeated, his voice getting stronger with each word. We're done taking care of you. It's time you found somewhere else to live. Maybe one of those nice assisted living places where you can play bingo with people your own age. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, and supported through college. I looked at the woman he'd married, the one who'd smiled so sweetly when they needed my help with their down payment 3 years ago, and I realized that the lottery ticket in Garrett's hands had done more than make them rich. It had shown me exactly who they really were. Son, I said, standing up slowly from my chair, before you start making plans with that ticket, maybe you should take a closer look at whose name is actually printed on it. The room went dead silent. Savannah stopped mid-celebration, her face suddenly uncertain. Garrett looked down at the ticket in his hands, really looked at it for the first time since the drawing ended, and that's when everything changed. But before I tell you what happened next in that tension-filled living room, you need to understand how I ended up in that chair, watching my own son celebrate what he thought was his ticket to freedom from me. The story starts 35 years ago, when my hands were steady, my back was strong, and I believed that hard work and family loyalty meant something in this world. I was 27 years old when I first picked up a hammer for Brennan Construction here in Denver. Fresh out of a failed marriage, determined to build something solid for myself and the 3-year-old boy who was depending on me. Garrett's mother had decided that being a wife and mother wasn't the adventure she'd signed up for, so she left us both behind to find herself in California. I never saw her again, and honestly, that was probably for the best. Those early years were brutal. I'd drop Garrett off at daycare before dawn and pick him up after dark, my clothes covered in sawdust and drywall dust, my muscles aching from 10-hour days of framing houses and installing roofing. But every paycheck meant we could stay in our little apartment. Every overtime shift meant Garrett could have new school clothes or a birthday party with his friends. I wasn't the smartest guy on the crew, and I sure wasn't the most talented, but I was reliable. When the foreman needed someone to work Saturday, Leo Hartwell raised his hand. When they needed someone to stay late to finish a job, Leo Hartwell stayed. When the new guys needed training, Leo Hartwell showed them the ropes without expecting extra pay. Year after year, I watched younger men get promoted to supervisor positions while I stayed on the tools. It stung sometimes, sure, but I told myself that steady work was better than the uncertainty that came with management. Besides, I had a son to think about, and Garrett needed stability more than I needed recognition. By the time Garrett turned 18, I'd saved enough for a down payment on this house. It wasn't much to look at back then, just a small ranch-style place in a decent neighborhood, but it was ours. I remember the day we moved in, how proud Garrett seemed to finally have a real home instead of a series of rental apartments. He brought his girlfriend Savannah over for dinner that first week, and she complimented the hardwood floors I'd installed myself, the kitchen cabinets I'd built from scratch. "Your dad's really talented," she told Garrett that night. "You're lucky to have someone who can fix anything. Lucky." That word would come back to haunt me later. I put Garrett through college, working double shifts and weekend jobs to pay his tuition. He wanted to study marketing, said he was going to make real money someday, not like his old man who'd never amount to more than a carpenter. It hurt to hear him talk that way, but I figured it was just young man's ambition talking. He'd understand the value of honest work when he got older. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in March 3 years ago. We were working on a high-end development in Cherry Creek, installing custom staircases in houses that cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. I was carrying a load of oak treads up to the second floor when my foot hit a patch of sawdust on the steps. The fall itself wasn't that bad, but the way I landed with 200 pounds of hardwood crashing down on my lower back changed everything. 3 herniated discs and 2 fractured vertebrae. Later the doctors told me my construction days were over. At 59 years old, I was done. Finished. The disability payments would cover basic expenses, but the days of overtime and weekend work were behind me forever. That's when Garrett and Savannah made their generous offer. They'd moved in together after college, but were struggling to afford rent on their own place. Why didn't I sell the house and move in with them? They'd found a nice rental, and with my disability money helping with expenses, we could all live comfortably together. It seemed like a perfect solution. I'd have family around as I adjusted to retirement, and they'd have help with the bills. We were all adults, all reasonable people. What could go wrong? What went wrong was that $800 a month apparently wasn't enough to buy me basic respect in my own son's eyes. What went wrong was that Savannah's compliments about my handiwork turned into complaints about having an old man cluttering up their space. What went wrong was that the family loyalty I'd spent 35 years building crumbled the moment money got tight. "Dad, we need to talk about your contribution," Garrett had said just last week, using that tone he'd learned in his marketing job, the one that made everything sound reasonable even when it wasn't. $800 doesn't really cover having another person in the house. The utilities alone cost more than that. I'd looked around the living room where we were having this conversation at the furniture. I'd bought the walls, I'd painted the floors, I'd refinished. "I thought we were family," I said quietly. "We are family," Savannah had chimed in, "but family members need to pull their weight. Maybe it's time to consider other living arrangements. Somewhere more appropriate for your age and situation. Other living arrangements." That was their polite way of saying they wanted me gone, but didn't have the courage to say it directly. At least not until they thought they had 50 million reasons to be honest about their feelings. But as I sat in that chair watching them celebrate their lottery win, I knew something they didn't know. Something that would change everything about their grand plans for the future. The ticket in Garrett's hands wasn't going to set them free from me. It was going to set me free from them. The Leo Hartwell who had built this house with his own hands was a different man from the one sitting in that recliner watching his family's true colors emerge under the glow of lottery fever. 3 years of living as an unwelcome guest in what used to be my sanctuary had worn me down in ways that 35 years of construction work never could. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up at 5:30, the same time my body had been programmed to wake up for decades of early construction shifts. Only now, There was nowhere to go and nothing to build. I'd make my coffee quietly, trying not to disturb Garrett and Savannah, who considered any noise before 8 a.m. to be a personal assault on their comfort. The kitchen had become a minefield of unspoken rules. My generic brand coffee had to stay in the back corner of the pantry behind their organic fair trade blend that cost more per pound than I used to spend on groceries in a week. My medications couldn't sit on the counter because they cluttered the aesthetic Savannah was going for. Even my favorite mug, a simple ceramic cup Garrett had made for me in a high school pottery class, had been relegated to the back of the cabinet to make room for their matching designer coffee set. "Dad, we need to talk about the grocery situation," Savannah had announced one morning about a month ago, standing in the kitchen doorway in her expensive silk robe, the one that probably cost more than my entire monthly disability check. "Your food is taking up way too much space in our refrigerator. Our refrigerator. In the house I'd helped them buy with the kitchen. I'd remodeled myself. She was telling me that my modest collection of sandwich meat and yogurt cups was an inconvenience. "I buy my own groceries," I'd said carefully. "I don't eat your food." "That's not the point," Garrett had added, appearing behind his wife like a backup singer. "It's about space management. We're trying to maintain a certain lifestyle here, and having the fridge stuffed with random old man food doesn't really fit our vision." Random old man food. That's what my son called the simple meals I'd been eating for 62 years. Apparently, my bologna sandwiches and instant oatmeal were somehow incompatible with their vision of sophisticated living. The worst part wasn't the constant criticism about my habits or my belongings. The worst part was watching them spend money like water while complaining about my $800 contribution. Garrett drove a leased BMW that cost more per month than my entire disability check, but somehow my request to keep the thermostat at 68 degrees was financially irresponsible. Savannah's shopping addiction was legendary. Packages arrived daily from online retailers, boxes full of clothes she'd wear once, kitchen gadgets she'd never use, decorative items that would sit around for a few weeks before being replaced by the next trend. I watched her spend $300 on a single handbag while lecturing me about the cost of my prescription medications. "Leo, we really need to discuss your healthcare expenses," she'd said just 2 weeks ago, waving a stack of insurance statements like evidence in a criminal trial. "These doctor visits are getting expensive, and frankly, we're not sure it's sustainable for us to keep supporting this lifestyle." Supporting this lifestyle, as if my monthly checkups for chronic back pain and blood pressure medication were some kind of luxury vacation I was taking at their expense. The breaking point came last Tuesday, the day before that fateful lottery drawing. I'd been sitting in my chair reading the newspaper and minding my own business when Savannah stormed into the living room with their monthly bills spread out like tarot cards predicting financial doom. "Look at this," she'd snapped, shoving the electric bill in my face. $247. "That's almost $30 more than last month, and I know it's because you keep your space heater running in your room." My space heater, the small, energy-efficient unit I used to keep my bedroom comfortable because they kept the rest of the house at a temperature that felt like a meat locker. "Savannah," I'd said quietly, "it's November in Colorado. People use heat in November." "People who can afford heat use heat," Garrett had added from the couch, not even bothering to look away from his laptop where he was probably shopping for more things they couldn't afford. "People who contribute their fair share get to make decisions about utility usage." That's when I realized they weren't just tired of supporting me. They were actively looking for reasons to get rid of me. Every bill, every grocery receipt, every minor household expense had become ammunition in their campaign to make me feel unwelcome in what used to be my home. "You know what," Savannah had said, pulling a crumpled $20 bill from her designer purse. "Here, take this and go buy some groceries. And while you're at the store, buy a lottery ticket or something. Maybe you'll get lucky and solve all our problems." She'd thrust the money at me like it was contaminated, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her phone case as she immediately went back to scrolling through social media. $20, the same amount I used to spend on lunch for both of us when Garrett was a kid and we'd go to McDonald's as a special treat. "Maybe I will," I'd said, taking the 20 and folding it carefully into my wallet. "Don't spend it all in one place," Garrett had called after me, laughing at his own joke. "Actually, do spend it all in one place. On lottery tickets? Maybe you'll win enough to move out and get your own place." If they only knew how prophetic those words would turn out to be. If they only knew that their casual cruelty was about to become the catalyst for the biggest mistake of their lives. I'd walked to King Soopers that afternoon with their $20 in my pocket and a plan forming in my mind. A plan that would teach them exactly what it meant to bite the hand that feeds you. A plan that would show them the true cost of treating family like a burden instead of a blessing. That $20 bill was about to buy them the most expensive lesson of their lives. That walk to King Soopers on Tuesday afternoon was more than just a grocery run. It was a reconnaissance mission, a final preparation for a plan I'd been considering for weeks but hadn't had the courage to execute until Savannah handed me that $20 bill with such obvious contempt. You see, most people don't realize that when you've spent 35 years in construction, you learn more than just how to swing a hammer or read blueprints. You learn about contracts, property law, and the importance of having everything in writing. You learn that the devil is always in the details, and that smart preparation can save you from a world of trouble down the road. 3 weeks earlier, when Garrett had made his first serious threat about alternative living arrangements, I'd made a quiet visit to Morrison Legal Services downtown. Patricia Morrison was a sharp woman in her 50s, who specialized in elder law and property rights. Her office was small but efficient, the kind of place where people went when they needed real legal advice, not just expensive letterhead. "Mr. Hartwell," she'd said after I explained my situation, "let me make sure I understand this correctly. You own this house outright, but your son and daughter-in-law are living there as well, and they're pressuring you to leave. The deed is in my name," I'd confirmed. "Has been since I bought the place 24 years ago. They moved in 3 years ago when I had my accident, supposedly to help take care of me." Patricia had nodded knowingly. She'd probably seen this scenario dozens of times before. Adult children who saw elderly parents as burdens instead of blessings, who forgot that respect and gratitude weren't optional just because someone got old. "Colorado law is very clear about property rights," she'd explained. "As long as your name is on the deed and you're mentally competent, which you obviously are, no one can force you to leave your own home. In fact, if they're threatening you or trying to coerce you into leaving, that could constitute elder abuse under state law." Elder abuse. I'd never thought of it in those terms, but hearing a legal professional use those words made something click in my mind. What Garrett and Savannah were doing wasn't just cruel or ungrateful. It was actually illegal. "What would you recommend?" I'd asked. "Document everything," Patricia had said firmly. "Keep records of their threats, their demands for money, any attempts to intimidate you into leaving. And if you're really concerned about your security in that house, you might want to consider updating your estate planning documents." That's when she'd explained something I hadn't considered. If something happened to me, my current will left everything to Garrett as my only heir. But wills could be changed, especially when circumstances revealed that your heir might not have your best interests at heart. "There's also the matter of any joint assets or shared financial arrangements," Patricia had continued. "If they're contributing to household expenses, or if there are any shared accounts, you need to understand exactly what your legal obligations are." Shared accounts. That had given me an idea, a deliciously perfect idea, that would teach them exactly what it meant to take someone for granted. The next week, I'd made another trip downtown, this time to First National Bank, where I'd done my banking for 20 years. My account manager, David Chen, was a patient man who'd helped me navigate the financial complexities of disability payments and retirement planning. "I want to understand something about Colorado lottery law," I told him. "If someone gives me money to buy a lottery ticket, and I buy it in my name, who owns the ticket legally?" David had pulled up the relevant statutes on his computer. "According to Colorado law, the person whose name appears on the ticket is the legal owner, regardless of who provided the money for the purchase. There have been several court cases about this, usually involving workplace lottery pools or family disputes." Family disputes. How prophetic. "So if my daughter-in-law gives me $20 and tells me to buy lottery tickets, and I buy them in my name, those tickets belong to me." "Absolutely," David had confirmed. "The law is designed to prevent exactly the kind of confusion that can arise when multiple people claim ownership of winning tickets. The name on the ticket is what matters. Perfect. Absolutely perfect." That Tuesday afternoon at King Soopers, I'd taken my time in the grocery aisles, picking up the basics I needed while my mind worked through the final details of my plan. Bread, milk, eggs, lunch meat. Simple foods for a simple man who was about to teach his family a very complicated lesson about respect and gratitude. At the customer service counter, I'd approached the lottery machine with Savannah's $20 bill in my hand. The teenage clerk, probably working his way through college just like I'd worked my way through life, had been helpful and efficient. "What can I get you today, sir? One Mega Millions ticket," I'd said clearly. "Quick pick numbers, and I want the name on the ticket to be Leonard Hartwell." "Leonard Hartwell," he'd repeated, typing it into the system. "That's Leonard Hartwell. That's correct. The machine had whirred and clicked, printing out a small slip of paper that looked insignificant but represented so much more than just a lottery ticket. It represented justice. It represented consequences. It represented the moment when Garrett and Savannah would learn that actions have prices, and sometimes those prices are higher than anyone expects to pay. I'd folded the ticket carefully and placed it in my wallet right behind my driver's license where it would be safe and secure. Then, I'd used the remaining $7 of Savannah's money to buy the groceries she'd sent me for completing my mission exactly as requested. The walk home had felt different, somehow lighter despite the grocery bags in my hands. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my situation. For the first time since my accident, I felt like Leonard Hartwell was more than just a burden to be managed. That night, I'd lain in bed listening to Garrett and Savannah argue about money in the next room, their voices carrying through the thin walls of the house I'd built with my own hands. They were worried about credit card bills and car payments, stressed about maintaining their lifestyle on their inconsistent incomes. If they only knew that the solution to all their problems was sitting in my wallet, printed on a piece of paper worth either nothing or everything depending on what happened in tomorrow night's drawing. The trap was set. The pieces were in place. Now I just had to wait and see if the universe had a sense of justice that matched my own sense of irony. And that brings us back to this moment standing in my living room while Garrett stared at that lottery ticket like it had just turned into a venomous snake in his hands. The silence stretched between us like a canyon filled with the weight of 3 years of accumulated disrespect, and the sudden terrifying possibility that their golden ticket to freedom wasn't quite what they thought it was. "What do you mean, whose name is on the ticket?" Savannah's voice had climbed an octave higher, that shrill tone she got when things weren't going according to her carefully planned script. "It's our ticket. We bought it. We won it." I walked slowly to where Garrett sat frozen on the couch, his face pale as winter snow. "Son, may I see that ticket for a moment?" His hands were shaking as he passed it to me, and I could smell the fear sweat starting to break out on his forehead. Funny how quickly confidence could evaporate when reality came knocking. I held the ticket up to the light, making sure both of them could see it clearly. Mega Millions ticket, purchased Tuesday, November 14th at King Soopers on Federal Boulevard. Drawing date November 15th. Winning numbers 7, 23, 31, 42, 58 with Mega Ball 12. I paused, letting the tension build like a master conductor preparing for the crescendo. "And the name printed right here at the bottom, Leonard Hartwell." "That's impossible," Garrett whispered. "You bought that ticket for us." "With our money. I bought this ticket with $20 your wife gave me," I corrected gently. "But I bought it in my name, which, according to Colorado state law, makes it my property regardless of who provided the funds for the purchase." Savannah made a sound like a wounded animal. "You can't do this to us. We're family. That money was meant for groceries, and you were supposed to buy the ticket for all of us." "Family." I repeated the word slowly, tasting its bitter irony. "You mean the same family that's been trying to throw me out of my own house. The same family that calls my disability payments pathetic pennies, and my medical needs unsustainable lifestyle choices. Dad, we never afford enough," said Garrett started, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Oh, but you did say those things, son. You said them loud and clear. In fact, let me refresh your memory about some of the other things you've said recently." I pulled out my phone, the same basic smartphone they'd mocked me for using instead of upgrading to the latest model. "You see, Patricia Morrison, my attorney, suggested I document our conversations. Amazing what people will say when they think the old man is too stupid to protect himself." I pressed play on a recording from last week, and Garrett's voice filled the room. "Dad, we really need to discuss your living situation. $800 a month doesn't cover having another person here, and frankly, we're starting to think you'd be happier somewhere more appropriate for people your age." Savannah's face went white. "You recorded us. I documented threats against my housing security," I corrected. "Which, according to Colorado elder abuse statutes, is exactly what I should have been doing." I pressed play again, and this time it was Savannah's voice. "Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live. We can't keep supporting this lifestyle forever." "That's not what I meant," she stammered. "We were just concerned about getting rid of me so you could live your champagne lifestyle on beer money," I finished. "Well, congratulations. Your wish is about to come true, just not the way you expected." Garrett lunged forward, desperation making him bold. "Dad, you can't do this. We'll contest it. We'll sue. That ticket should belong to all of us." "With what money?" I asked calmly. Your BMW lease payment is $467 a month. Savannah's credit card debt is currently sitting at just over $18,000. Your combined income barely covers your expenses, even with my $800 contribution. Exactly. How do you plan to afford a legal battle against a man who just won $50 million? The math hit them like a physical blow. I watched the realization sink in that not only were they losing their lottery windfall, but they were also losing their primary source of financial stability. Me. But this house, Savannah said weakly, we live here too. You can't just throw us out. I smiled, and for the first time in 3 years it was a genuine smile. Actually, I can. You see, while you two were busy planning my eviction, I was busy making sure the property deed was crystal clear. This house belongs to Leonard Hartwell and Leonard Hartwell alone. I have every legal right to determine who lives here and who doesn't. You're bluffing, Garrett said, but his voice lacked conviction. You wouldn't really kick us out. We're your family. Family, I repeated again. You keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. Family doesn't threaten each other with homelessness. Family doesn't call each other dead weight. Family doesn't treat their elders like burdens to be discarded the moment something better comes along. I walked to the front closet and pulled out my coat, the same worn jacket I'd been wearing for 5 years because I couldn't afford to replace it on my disability income. The beautiful irony of this situation is that you were absolutely right about one thing. That $20 you gave me did solve all our problems. It solved my problem of living with people who don't respect me, and it solved your problem of having to support someone you consider a burden. Dad, please, Garrett's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. We can work this out. We can all share the money. We can be a real family again. Again I paused with my hand on the doorknob. When exactly were we ever a real family, son? When you were complaining about my space heater, when Savannah was lecturing me about my prescription costs, when you were both counting down the days until you could ship me off to some assisted living facility. The silence that followed was deafening. They had no answer because we all knew the truth. The lottery ticket hadn't revealed their greed. It had simply given them permission to show me what had been in their hearts all along. I'll be staying at the Hampton Inn while I make arrangements to claim my prize, I said, opening the door to let the cold November air rush in around us. You have 30 days to find alternative living arrangements. That should give you plenty of time to figure out how to maintain your lifestyle without my pathetic pennies. And with that, I stepped out into the night air, leaving behind 3 years of humiliation and walking toward a future that was finally completely my own. The cold November air hit my face like a baptism, washing away 3 years of accumulated shame and humiliation. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of panic and desperation seeping through the walls of what used to feel like a prison, but now felt like someone else's problem entirely. I'd made it halfway down the front walkway when Garrett's voice exploded from the doorway behind me. Dad, wait. You can't just leave like this. I paused, but didn't turn around. There was something liberating about having my back to them, about not having to see the faces that had looked at me with such contempt for so long. I can leave any way I choose, son. It's called freedom. But we need to talk about this. Savannah's voice joined the chorus, high and desperate. We need to work something out. You can't destroy our family over money. That made me turn around. There they stood in the doorway of my house, backlit by the warm light from the living room, looking like actors in a play about people who'd just realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake. Garrett was still holding his phone, probably trying to figure out if there was some legal loophole that could save them. Savannah clutched the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Destroy our family over money, I repeated slowly. That's rich coming from the two people who were ready to throw me into an assisted living facility the moment you thought you had enough cash to afford it. We never said assisted living, Garrett protested weakly. No, you said somewhere more appropriate for people my age, I corrected, which is just a polite way of saying the same thing. But don't worry about destroying our family, son. You already did that. The lottery ticket just made it official. Savannah stumbled down the front steps, her designer heels clicking frantically on the concrete. Leo, please, you have to understand. We were stressed about money. People say things they don't mean when they're under pressure. Stress. I nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I can understand stress. I was stressed when I worked double shifts to put Garrett through college. I was stressed when I took out a second mortgage to help you two with your wedding. I was stressed when I sold my tools and gave up the only career I'd ever known, because my body couldn't handle the work anymore. But you know what I never did during all that stress? They waited, probably, hoping I was about to offer them some kind of olive branch. I never treated my family like garbage. I finished. I never counted the cost of love in dollars and cents. Garrett stepped forward, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee or had a bad dream. Dad, I know we messed up. I know we said things we shouldn't have said. But we can fix this. We're still family. Are we? I pulled the lottery ticket from my wallet and held it up so they could see it clearly in the porch light. Because family members don't usually need legal documentation to prove they deserve basic respect. You're really going to do this, Savannah said, and her voice had shifted from desperate to bitter. You're really going to take $50 million and leave us with nothing. I'm taking what belongs to me, I corrected, and I'm leaving you with exactly what you had before you started counting on money that was never yours to begin with. We'll fight this, Garrett said suddenly, his voice hardening with a familiar edge. We'll get lawyers. We'll prove that ticket should belong to all of us. There he was. There was the real Garrett, the one who emerged whenever he didn't get his way. The threats, the bluster, the assumption that he could intimidate me into giving him what he wanted. With what money, I asked again. And more importantly, with what evidence I have recordings of you threatening to kick me out of my own house. I have documentation of your financial demands. I have witnesses to your treatment of me over the past 3 years. What do you have? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. They had nothing, and we all knew it. Besides, I continued, even if you could somehow prove that $20 gave you a claim to this ticket, you'd still have to explain to a judge why you think you deserve $50 million after spending 3 years trying to get rid of the man who raised you and supported you. Savannah's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the way she'd looked at me when she handed me that $20 bill like I was a dog she was throwing scraps to. Where will we go? She whispered. This is our home. This was never your home, I said gently. It was my home, and I was generous enough to share it with you when you needed help. Now you'll have to figure out how to make your own way, just like I did when I was your age. I turned and started walking toward my truck, the same reliable Ford F-150 I'd been driving for 8 years. It wasn't fancy, but it was paid for, and it would get me where I needed to go. Dad Garrett called after me one last time. What about Christmas? What about family dinners? What about all the memories we made in that house? I stopped with my hand on the truck door handle. What about them, son? Did you think about Christmas when you were planning to ship me off to a nursing home? Did you think about family dinners when you were complaining about the cost of feeding me? Did you think about memories when you were treating me like a burden you couldn't wait to get rid of? I climbed into the truck and rolled down the window. You want some advice. Learn to appreciate what you have while you have it. Learn to treat people with respect, regardless of what they can do for you financially. And learn that family isn't about what someone can contribute to your lifestyle. It's about love, loyalty, and basic human decency. I started the engine, and the familiar rumble felt like a promise of better days ahead. Oh, and one more thing. When you're packing your belongings, please be careful with the hardwood floors. I installed them myself, and I'd hate to see them get damaged. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing in the driveway of the house they'd thought was theirs, holding each other, and probably trying to figure out how their perfect plan had gone so spectacularly wrong. For the first time in 3 years, Leonard Hartwell was exactly where he belonged, in control of his own destiny, with enough money to live comfortably and free from people who measured his worth by the size of his monthly contribution. The Hampton Inn had never looked so much like paradise. The Colorado Lottery headquarters in Pueblo looked like any other government building from the outside, but to me it might as well have been the gates of heaven. I'd driven the 2 hours south from Denver that Wednesday morning, the winning ticket safely, tucked in my wallet next to my driver's license and social security card, feeling like a man who was about to reclaim his life after years of having it managed by people who didn't value it. The Hampton Inn had been comfortable enough for one night, but I'd barely slept. Not from anxiety or worry, but from the pure excitement of knowing that everything was about to change. For the first time since my accident 3 years ago, I was going to have choices. Real choices about where to live, how to spend my time, and most importantly, who deserved to be part of my future. The lobby of the lottery office was surprisingly quiet, decorated with oversized photographs of previous winners holding those giant ceremonial checks. Happy families, young couples, elderly folks like myself who'd beaten impossible odds to win life-changing money. I wondered how many of their stories involved family members who'd shown their true colors the moment money entered the picture. Mr. Hartwell, a professional-looking woman in her 40s, approached me with a warm smile. I'm Rebecca Martinez, and I'll be helping you with your claim today. Congratulations on your win. Thank you, I said, standing up and shaking her hand. I have to admit, I'm still having trouble believing it's real. Oh, it's real, Rebecca assured me as she led me to a private office. But we do need to go through our verification process to make sure everything is legitimate. May I see the ticket? I handed over the small slip of paper that had caused such chaos in my living room just 12 hours earlier. Rebecca examined it under a special light, checking watermarks and security features that I hadn't even known existed. Everything looks perfect, she said after a few minutes. The ticket was purchased at King Soopers on Federal Boulevard in Denver on November 14th, and the drawing was November 15th. The name on the ticket is Leonard Hartwell, which matches your identification. That's correct. Now, Mr. Hartwell, I need to ask you a few questions for our records. Did you purchase this ticket yourself? I did. With your own money? I paused for just a moment, thinking about how to answer that question honestly. The money was given to me by my daughter-in-law to buy groceries and lottery tickets. When I purchased the ticket, I requested that it be printed in my name, making it my legal property under Colorado law. Rebecca nodded and made notes on her form. That's perfectly legal and actually quite common. The name on the ticket determines ownership regardless of who provided the funds. Were there any other people involved in selecting the numbers or purchasing the ticket number? I requested quick pick numbers, and I was the only person present at the time of purchase. Excellent. Now let's talk about your payout options. Rebecca pulled out a calculator and a thick folder of documents. Your jackpot is $50 million. You can choose to receive the full amount in annual payments over 30 years, or you can take the lump sum cash option, which after taxes would be approximately $30 million. $30 million. Even after taxes, it was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. More money than 3 generations of Hartwells had earned combined. I'll take the lump sum, I said without hesitation. At 62 years old, I didn't want to spend the next 30 years worrying about annual payments. I wanted my money now, while I was still healthy enough to enjoy it. Smart choice for someone your age, Rebecca agreed. The funds will be transferred to your designated bank account within 7 to 10 business days. In the meantime, I'd recommend speaking with a financial advisor about investment strategies and tax planning. I'll do that. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Rebecca said, pulling out another form. Colorado allows lottery winners to remain anonymous if they choose. Given the size of your jackpot, you might want to consider this option to protect your privacy. Privacy. Yes, I definitely wanted privacy. The last thing I needed was reporters calling or distant relatives suddenly remembering they cared about me. I'd like to remain anonymous, I said firmly. Perfect. We'll handle all the paperwork for that. Rebecca smiled and extended her hand again. Congratulations, Mr. Hartwell. You're officially a millionaire. Walking out of that building felt like walking into a completely different life. The same November sun was shining, the same Colorado mountains stretched across the horizon, but everything had changed. I was no longer Leonard Hartwell, the disabled construction worker living on charity in his son's house. I was Leonard Hartwell, multimillionaire, with enough money to live exactly the way I wanted for the rest of my life. The drive back north took me through some of the most beautiful country in Colorado, and for the first time in years I actually noticed the scenery. Snow-capped peaks, golden aspen groves, crystal-clear mountain streams that sparkled in the afternoon light. This was the Colorado I'd fallen in love with as a young man before years of financial stress and family obligations had taught me to keep my eyes on the road and my mind on survival. Instead of heading back to Denver, I took a detour west toward the mountains. I had nowhere I needed to be, no one expecting me home, no schedule to keep except my own. The freedom was intoxicating. That's when I saw the sign for Aspen, and something clicked in my mind. I'd driven through Aspen exactly once in my life 20 years ago when Margaret and I had taken a weekend trip to see the fall colors. We'd talked about how beautiful it would be to live in a place like that, surrounded by mountains and clean air, where every day felt like a vacation. Someday, Margaret had said, squeezing my hand as we drove through the downtown area with its elegant shops and cozy restaurants. When we retire, maybe we'll find a little place up here. Someday had finally arrived. I pulled into a real estate office on Main Street, still wearing my construction boots and work jacket, probably looking like the last person who could afford property in one of Colorado's most exclusive mountain towns. The agent, a polished woman named Jennifer, looked me up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "Can I help you with something? I'm looking to buy a house," I said simply. "Something with a mountain view, maybe 3 bedrooms good for a single man who wants privacy and peace." "Our properties start at around $2 million, Jennifer said, clearly expecting me to turn around and leave. Instead, I smiled. "That sounds reasonable. When can we start looking?" 3 months later, I'm sitting in the living room of my new home in Aspen, watching the February snow fall softly on the pine trees outside my window, and I can honestly say I've never been happier in my entire 62 years of life. The house Jennifer showed me that day turned out to be perfect, a beautiful mountain, contemporary with floor-to-ceiling windows, a stone fireplace, and enough space for a man to think clearly about what really matters. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm now living in a house worth more than most people make in a lifetime, while Garrett and Savannah are probably struggling to make rent on some cramped apartment in Denver. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that they'd had to move out of my old house within 2 weeks once they realized I was serious about the 30-day notice. Apparently, without my $800 a month and the free housing I'd been providing, their champagne lifestyle collapsed pretty quickly. I can't say I feel sorry for them. This morning, like every morning for the past 3 months, I made my coffee in a kitchen that belongs entirely to me, ate my breakfast at a table where no one criticizes my food choices, and read my newspaper in blessed silence. No complaints about utility bills, no lectures about my medical expenses, no passive-aggressive comments about my contribution to the household budget. The financial advisor Rebecca recommended has set up a conservative investment portfolio that will generate more income per month than I used to make in a year of construction work. I could live comfortably for the rest of my life without ever touching the principal and still have enough left over to help people who actually deserve help. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Real generosity, the kind that comes from the heart instead of obligation or guilt. Last week, I anonymously paid off the medical bills for a young family at the local hospital whose son needed surgery they couldn't afford. The week before that, I quietly funded a scholarship at the community college for students studying construction trades. These are the kinds of things money should be used for, helping people who are working hard and just need a break, not supporting adults who think the world owes them a comfortable lifestyle. I've also been thinking about Margaret and what she would say if she could see me now. I think she'd be proud that I finally stood up for myself, that I didn't let our son treat me like a burden in my own home. Margaret always had a strong sense of justice, and she never tolerated disrespect from anyone, including family members who thought they were entitled to more than they'd earned. The house has 3 bedrooms, and sometimes I wonder if I should have visitors maybe reconnect with old friends from my construction days or distant relatives who might actually appreciate having me in their lives. But honestly, the peace and quiet feel too precious to disturb right now. For the first time in years, I can make decisions based on what I want instead of what other people expect from me. My phone rarely rings anymore, which is exactly how I like it. I changed my number after the first week of constant calls from Garrett and Savannah, desperate voicemails that started with apologies and quickly escalated to threats and accusations. They even tried to get some of my old coworkers to call me people who barely knew the situation but had been fed some sob story about their heartless father abandoning his family. The truth has a way of coming out, though. Word travels fast in Denver's construction community, and it didn't take long for people to learn the real story about how my own son and daughter-in-law had treated me. The last I heard, Garrett was having trouble finding steady work because his reputation for ingratitude and entitlement had preceded him to several job interviews. Actions have consequences. It's a lesson I learned early in life working with my hands, and understanding that shortcuts and sloppy work always come back to haunt you. Garrett and Savannah are learning that same lesson now, just in a different context. But I don't spend much time thinking about them anymore. Instead, I think about the future, about all the things I can do now that I have the freedom and resources to do them properly. I'm considering taking some art classes, maybe learning to paint the mountain landscapes I see from my windows every day. I might travel, visit some of the places Margaret and I always talked about seeing but never could afford. The most important thing I've learned from this whole experience is that respect isn't something you can buy or demand. It's something you earn through your actions, and it's something you give freely to people who deserve it. For 3 years, I tried to earn respect through financial contributions and helpful behavior, but I was offering it to people who had already decided I wasn't worth respecting. Now, I'm surrounded by people who treat me with natural courtesy and kindness. My neighbors here in Aspen don't know about my lottery win. They just know me as the quiet gentleman who keeps his property neat and says good morning when we pass on our walks. The local shopkeepers remember my name and ask about my day because that's the kind of community this is, where people treat each other with basic human decency regardless of their bank account balance. That's the real jackpot, I've realized. Not the $30 million, though, that certainly helps. The real prize is waking up every day in a place where I'm valued simply for being a decent human being, where my worth isn't measured by my monthly contribution to someone else's lifestyle. Sometimes, late at night, when the mountain air is crystal clear and the stars shine brighter than they ever did in the city, I think about that $20 bill Savannah handed me with such contempt. $20 that she thought would buy her freedom from an inconvenient old man. Instead, it bought me freedom from people who never deserved my love and loyalty in the first place. The house that Leo built isn't made of wood and nails this time. It's made of self-respect, financial security, and the hard-earned wisdom that comes from finally understanding your own worth. And it's the most beautiful home I've ever lived in. As I sit here in my mountain home, watching another Colorado sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and pink, I've come to understand something profound about the nature of family respect and true wealth. Money doesn't change who people are, it simply reveals who they've always been. That $50 million lottery ticket didn't make Garrett and Savannah greedy and ungrateful, it just gave them permission to show me what had been in their hearts all along. The real lesson here isn't about lottery tickets or legal loopholes or even about standing up to family members who take you for granted. It's about understanding your own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your dignity as a human being. For too many years, I allowed myself to believe that my value was tied to what I could contribute financially, that my place in my son's home depended on the size of my monthly payment rather than the decades of love and sacrifice. I'd given freely, but dignity isn't for sale, and respect can't be purchased with disability checks or grocery money. These things must be earned through character, and given freely through love, or they're worth nothing at all. When someone treats you like a burden, believe them. When someone shows you that your presence in their life is conditional on your usefulness, don't waste years trying to prove your worth. You are worthy simply because you exist, because you've lived a life of honesty and hard work, because you've loved deeply and sacrificed willingly. The greatest tragedy of this story isn't that I lost my relationship with my son, it's that he lost his relationship with me. He traded 30-plus years of unconditional love for a lottery ticket that was never his to begin with. He chose temporary financial relief over permanent family bonds. And while I've found peace and happiness in my new life, I suspect he's discovering that some mistakes can't be undone with apologies or second chances. The mountains outside my window remind me daily that some things endure while others fade away. Real love endures. Authentic respect endures. But relationships built on convenience and financial benefit crumble the moment the money stops flowing. I built my life on solid foundations of work and integrity, and those foundations held strong even when everything else fell apart. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.